Good morning, everybody. I got my coffee, I got my vape. Let's talk a little. Last time we got together, I talked about panic attacks. Had some really good comments. There was a really good discussion. And it made me realize that we needed to dive into this a little bit deeper. But before we do, let's take a sip. So first of all, let's review just a little bit. What is panic attacks? Well, panic attacks are sudden fears which cause physical reaction where there is no physical cause. I mentioned last time that panic attacks could put us into fight or flight. I had a very good comment on the video where they pointed out that there is a third option, and that is freeze. That happens a lot of the time. I spoke a whole lot last time about phobias and unreasonable fears that cause panic attacks. But putting more thought into it, I realized that there are other things that aren't so unreasonable that can cause the same reaction and put us into panic attacks. And it may be even harder for us to recognize these panic attacks than from phobias or fears. Because if we have the phobias or fears, we pretty much know that we have them. But some of these others, we may not. A lot of times they're miscalculated. Between others and ourselves, we misidentify these. I know there's probably more. The more I think about this subject, the more I could go on and on and on. But here is just a few. Panic attacks can arise from confusion, confrontation, embarrassment, PTSD, and actual danger, whether it's be real or perceived danger. I'm not going to talk a lot about danger, keeping a level head in the face of danger. I will address that probably in another Coffee with Phil. That is a very deep rabbit hole and another subject all to itself. I'm also not going to talk about the PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder. This can be very difficult to diagnose and very tricky to work with on your own. If you've experienced any kind of trauma, whether physical and or psychological, please get help with this. It's not something you need to deal with on your own. I'd like to talk about the other three. In that very good comment, that person described a scenario where they didn't realize that they were having panic attacks. And that was in a corporate environment. It was in meetings when they were contradicted or confronted. And it seemed to me that they were describing that they would go into fight mode, which led to all kinds of problems. Being publicly embarrassed, that's a big one for me. I can't even watch comedies and scenarios where people are embarrassed. It's just like fingernails on chalkboard to me. I don't enjoy it and I won't watch it. But another one that's hit me really hard is confusion. This came up a lot with my brain fog, especially when it was really, really bad. It pretty much caused me to isolate myself from people, especially people that I knew, because that confusion would lead to embarrassment. They get the root of all of these three is the basic primal fear. It's the basic fear that we all have, and a lot of times don't even realize it. It's expressed in many, many different ways. I truly believe its origin comes from when we lived in tribes. Dealing so much with social phobias, I've put a lot of thought into how our fears are wrapped around community. And one of the conclusions that I found through reading and exploring was the fact that in primitive days, our survival was contingent on the community, the tribe. We had all kinds of dangers around us. We had wild animals, we had the weather, we had starvation, we had disease that we couldn't understand. We even had rocks falling from the sky. So it was really important for us to have other people that would be looking out for us, that would be sharing their food, that would take care of us when we were sick, and that would fight with us, whether it was fighting wild animals, hunting, or fighting other humans. There was kind of a hierarchy. At the very top was the protector. This was somebody that everybody depended on. Most times, it was probably somebody who was very strong that could protect them physically. But also it could be somebody who was just very wise, a healer or a mystic, somebody that could guide them, somebody could give them answers. They're at the top of the food chain. Everybody wanted to protect them. If there was a lack of food, they would make sure that they survived first. Then at the bottom, you had people who were very weak and were very dependent on other people to help protect them or provide for them. When the chips were down, these were the ones that would be abandoned first. It sounds cruel, but when you're talking about survival, people are worried about taking care of themselves and their own families, and it's the weakest that are picked off or abandoned first. Then in the middle, you had everybody else, and they were moving around in different levels. So it was very important that other people liked you. It was very important that other people respected you. It could mean life or death to be challenged and to be seen as weak and be shunned by the rest of the community. If we are ostracized from the tribe, that means that we were out on our own, abandoned, and vulnerable. Well, I feel a little bit vulnerable from caffeine depletion. Well, I really reached for that one. Let's take a sip. Okay, so let's talk about the confrontation. We see this in animal communities all the time, the hierarchy. You have the leader who's the strongest, and he's constantly challenged. When he or she is challenged, then they have to defeat the challenger right away. If they lose the challenge, then the community will see them as weak, and they will turn on them or they will abandon them a lot of times. Heaven forbid that they are injured and then they can't provide for themselves. I believe we go through this as humans a lot too. There are those of us that work really hard to get in a place where other people respect us and even depend on us. And once we get there, we feel like we are safe until we are challenged. And some of us will actually get violent if we are challenged. The same thing happens with being publicly embarrassed, especially if it's a situation that you can't control, like other people are gossiping about you or spreading rumors. I always say that if you take two people and put them in the room, there's a good chance that they're going to become friends. If you put three people in a room, you're almost assured that two of them are going to bond and they're going to ostracize that third person. We see it all the time in our society where people will turn the community against somebody to make themselves feel stronger and to gain respect in that community. Politics is full of it. I know I'm talking a lot about these fears, but I think it's important for us to understand them so then we can begin to prepare ourselves for the panic attack. Let's take another sip and we'll get back on topic. So as I said before, the worst thing about panic attacks is that we don't recognize that we're having them so many times. In that comment, she went on to describe the fact that when she was confronted or contradicted, that she would strike out and she would become defensive. The more that she would become defensive and would strike out, the more others would challenge her, and it became a vicious cycle to where everybody thought that she was a jerk. I've had a little bit of correspondence with her, and I believe she's an awesome person. The fact that she would open up and share with us all shows that she is a really good person. After listening to me talk about panic attacks, she realized that what she was having was a panic attack. Panic attacks can come in all kinds of severity. They don't have to be something that makes you feel like you're having a heart attack or you're going to die. They can be very subtle, but your response to them is going to be the same. It's going to be fight, flight, or freeze. She went on to talk about the fact that after these meetings would happen, she would reflect on her reaction and she would wonder why she reacted that way. That is very important. When you have situations like that, when you respond in a negative way, when you become defensive, I feel like it's important for you then to look back at that situation from that third person and kind of break it apart. Help yourself to walk through it and see if that was actually what you were seeing. Were you actually being physically attacked? Did you actually have the danger of being abandoned or killed? I think most of the times we'll realize that no, we didn't. So then what were we feeling? Step by step. And then the next very, very important thing is you gotta forgive yourself. I say this all the time. We are all walking through this world blind, feeling our way around, and we're all doing the best we can do with what we have and the understandings we have at that moment. The next thing is to start figuring out, well, what was the trigger? At what point did we respond? When I started analyzing my fears, I realized that they weren't single fears. They were layers of an onion, and I had to unpeel each layer to be able to get to the very core. Once I could get to the core of it, a lot of times I wasn't afraid of it anymore because it was something I could manage. I didn't feel like I was in the dark forest and there was a huge beast that was going to jump out of the woods at me. So discover the triggers. There could be quite a few. Each onion layer could have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or a million different triggers that would automatically send you into that. It could be just a look from somebody, which could have absolutely nothing to do with you whatsoever. They could be having a bad day. They could have indigestion. You just never ever know, and it's not important to. Once you find those triggers, then you can analyze how you can recognize those triggers. Once you have figured out how to recognize them, then you can start working with how to counter them. I call those techniques counter-triggering. When a trigger happens and I recognize it, I have a thought or an action that I do that counter-triggers them, and I move on. Now that sounds easy. It's not. It comes with a lot of practice. Right now, I'm gonna practice sipping some coffee. Man, I'm really reaching for these today, aren't I? So throughout this whole entire process, there is one thing that is really gonna help you to be able for you to deal with the panic attacks. I talked about this in the last Coffee with Phil. You have to give yourself the right to have them. You have to be able to gauge when you're okay to push through, when you need to take a break and change the subject, or if you just need to leave it and come back to it later, or sometimes it's not even important enough to come back to later. You just go on with your life. I think throughout this, that is the most important point. The thing that causes the panic is the pressure we put on ourselves that we have to make a decision right then or there. We've got that little voice that just isn't going to leave us alone. They're going to be calling us weak. They're going to be saying, you've got to do this. You've got to do this now. Do it, do it, do it, do it, do it. That kind of pressure is the worst thing for a panic attack. It's like putting gas on a fire. And you know what can put out a fire? Coffee. Oh man, it's getting really bad. I really appreciated all the comments on the last video. I really liked the conversation that we started. Comment on this one. I've given you a lot of food for thought. The more I think about it, the more emotional responses in my life that I can contribute to small or large panic attacks. And I love it when I can do that because I know how to deal with them. I've had lots of practice and I've gotten really good at it. So let me know what you think. Do you relate to anything that I've talked about in the last 2 videos? What is your experience? What tricks have you figured out? Like I mentioned before, if you need to talk about it, reach out to me. My email address is right here on my information for the channel. Just let me know that you want to talk and I will free up some time. It really helps to have somebody else in this battle with you. It helps not to feel like you're alone. Well, that's all I have for this one. I'm going to keep thinking about this and exploring it. I feel like it's a very important subject, and I'm quite sure I'll have more conversation about this in later videos. So I hope you like this discussion. I hope you like this video. I don't even know if it is a video. It's more like a podcast, isn't it? If you did like it, do me a favor, hit that like button. If you didn't, hit the dislike button. Let me know. I like the feedback. If you're new to the channel, feel free to subscribe and join the community. If you can think of somebody that might benefit from this video or any of my videos, I would love it if you would share it with them. Also, don't forget to hit that ringy-dingy thing so you're notified the next time I make one of these things. And as always, no matter what tune that life plays you, always find your groove. Thanks for hanging out with me. We'll talk again soon.